Hello everyone. Welcome once again to this self-knowledge course. Today, we will be discussing infradimensions. This topic will reveal many details about our inner darkness, the very place from which the light of our consciousness emerges when we begin to observe and eliminate our negative ways of being. In a previous lecture, when we covered topics 5 and 6 of this course, we spoke about the different dimensions of nature and how they exist within us. This follows the law of correspondence. As it is outside, so it is inside. Each of us is a microcosm, a small reflection of the greater cosmos. This is why self-knowledge is so important. If we wish to understand and master the inner worlds of the planet, the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe, we must first learn to understand and govern our own internal world. Likewise, if we seek to know the divine beings who regulate the universe, we must first discover and develop our own inner divinity. Today's subject is crucial because it helps us realize that what happens outside of us also happens within us. Just as in the bowels of the planet, under the epidermis of the earth, there are the external infradimensions, so it happens within us, we have our inner infradimensions, what could be called our atomic hell. Let's begin by understanding what an infradimension is. We have already explained that dimensions are levels of consciousness. Higher dimensions correspond to states of consciousness beyond this third dimension. Among them, the highest are the sixth and seventh dimensions, often referred to as the heavens or the kingdom of heaven. Within us, these correspond to the level of the pituitary and pineal glands. Infradimensions, on the other hand, are levels of consciousness below the third dimension. These include the second and first dimensions, which are traditionally known as hell. It is important to understand that, although our physical body exists in the third dimension, our egoic psyche, along with all our psychological defects, resides in these lower dimensions. These defects keep us tied to lower levels of consciousness, limiting our spiritual development. Once we have exhausted our 108 opportunities in a human cycle, it is these psychological defects within our internal infradimensions that determine our descent into the involutionary process, an experience that takes place in the external infradimensions, beneath the surface of the earth. This is why today's lecture is so important. Here, we will learn to recognize and work with our own infradimensions. We will come to understand that wisdom arises from confronting our own darkness, and that light is hidden within our defects, waiting to be liberated. In our lower abdomen lie the 7 doors that lead to our internal infradimensions, our atomic hells. This is where all the psychological defects that form our visible moon reside. It is important to understand that the solar aspect within us is our spirit, composed of the different parts of our inner being. In contrast, our ego represents the lunar aspect of our nature. Every human being has 2 moons or 2 aspects of the ego, one visible and one hidden. The visible moon corresponds to our noticeable psychological defects and our own infradimensions. The hidden moon, on the other hand, is linked to the causal selves, the seeds of our ego, or the heads of the legion. It is also connected to the infradimensions of planet Earth. The first step in our work is to cleanse our visible moon, the part of our ego that exists in our own infradimensions. This is crucial because 97% of our sexual creative energy is trapped within our various psychological elements. To free this energy, we must descend into our own infradimensions through the practice of psychological death. Only by doing this can we recover the energy needed for the creation of our internal bodies. It is essential to understand that everything in this world is dual. There is good and evil. Just as we have negative psychological defects, we also have very good ways of being that are still part of the ego. However, neither good nor evil is true consciousness. Consciousness arises only when we extract wisdom from both. By working through our positive and negative defects, we can reach true understanding, the light. Merely believing ourselves to be good or striving to be good will not make us conscious beings. True consciousness emerges only when we recognize our own darkness and bring light out of it. When a being decides to eliminate all defects voluntarily, a psychological war begins, a daily battle against the psychological aggregates that surface from within. These eyes, egoic selves, take control of the centers of the human machine, including the sexual center and glands. By practicing psychological death, we cleanse each infradimension, eliminating our psychological defects and rescuing the trapped consciousness and wisdom within them. However, if we choose not to do this work voluntarily within our 108 human existences, we will inevitably go through the process of involution, as discussed in the last lecture. This means descending through the infradimensions of the planet, where our defects will be painfully and involuntarily disintegrated. This process unfolds as we regress through the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms, ultimately losing the soul developed in that cycle, along with the wisdom gained from that turn of the wheel. This is why working on our infradimensions is so crucial. Just as the infradimensions of planet Earth are divided into the 9 circles depicted by Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy, our internal infradimensions are also structured into 9 spheres. These spheres correspond to the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Within each of these spheres, specific types of psychological defects are grouped according to the law of affinity. It is essential to recognize that these infradimensions exist within us. To purify ourselves, attain inner freedom, and awaken our consciousness, we must work on eliminating these defects. Only by doing so can we raise our levels of consciousness, because true elevation is impossible without first removing what is heavy and impure within us. Now let's examine each of these spheres and the main psychological defects associated with them. The first infradimension is the sphere of the Moon, which is related to the defect of laziness, and to those who have not been baptized. This reveals to us that the first obstacle we must overcome is our own laziness, as it prevents us from beginning both our inner work and the essential work with sexual energy. The path of self-knowledge is about spiritually creating ourselves. However, laziness hinders all creation, leading us to waste energy on idle pursuits and spend our lives chasing things that do not truly contribute to the awakening of consciousness. Laziness manifests in 2 forms, active and passive, both of which block inner development. Active laziness makes us indulge in leisure, idly wasting time. Passive laziness makes us diligent in everything except the work of the being and the awakening of consciousness. It is said that those who have not been baptized remain in this first circle. But true baptism is not merely an external ritual of pouring water on a child's head. That is only a symbolic representation of a deeper process. Real baptism involves raising the waters to the head, symbolizing the work of sexual transmutation and spiritual birth. A truly baptized person is one who has eliminated the fornicating self, the defect that leads to the loss of sexual energy for mere pleasure. To be baptized means to achieve chastity, consciously transmuting one's sexual energy and raising it, vertebra by vertebra, up the spine to the head. This is the true significance of baptism. Those who overcome laziness and achieve this inner baptism, raising their own waters through sexual transmutation, liberate themselves from the first infradimension, the sphere of non-creation. This infradimension is conquered through action, by doing. The sphere of the Moon is related to the planet Moon and the sexual center. In this center, we find the atom of the secret enemy, the Antichrist, which prevents the execution of all work. The second infradimension is the sphere of Mercury. It is related to our seminal waters and our instinctive center. In this sphere, we find all our fornicating defects, those aspects of ourselves that fail to value our sexual creative energy. Humanity, in general, doesn't recognize the importance of this energy. We waste it through ejaculation and orgasm, unaware that this very fluid is what allows us to create internally and transform ourselves. Because of the immense power contained in sexual energy, the corrupted world we live in constantly encourages its misuse. Everywhere we turn, we find influences, methods, distractions, and temptations designed to make us waste it. Society has normalized this to such an extent that even schools now teach children to masturbate, initiating them from a young age into the harmful habit of expelling their energy. Pornography, music, and dance all contribute to the loss of the sacredness of sexuality, reducing it to a mere animalistic act. All our psychological defects are nourished by fornication. Every time we lose our sexual energy, we are feeding our ego and strengthening the very defects we are trying to eliminate. To free ourselves from this infradimension, we must eliminate the fornicating self and attain chastity. This means truly understanding the immense value of sexual energy, recognizing its power, and being completely determined in our efforts to overcome lust. It requires studying all the defects that at every moment try to push us toward wasting our energy. We must work on those instincts and sensations that prevent us from having full control over our sexual organs. Through psychological death, we must erase the deeply ingrained memory of orgasm and ejaculation that is recorded in the instinctive center, so that these sensations no longer cause us to fall during sexual practice. It is also important to analyze the harm that fornication, whether through sexual intercourse or masturbation, has caused us. We can observe its effects: premature ejaculation, impotence, hypersensitivity, homosexuality, and even the destruction of brain neurons. When we constantly deplete ourselves sexually, we weaken our own strength and vitality. We are left without the inner fire and energy needed to face life's challenges. By working on this inner infradimension, we reclaim our power and energy, essential forces for carrying out the great work of our being. The third infradimension is the sphere of Venus. It is related to all our pleasures and desires, and related to our emotional center. Here we find all our pleasures, such as the pleasure of eating, drinking, smoking, dancing, taking drugs, partying, working to have a lot of money, criticizing, falling in love, etc. All that we call pleasure, but that always ends in suffering. But there is something interesting to see here, and it is that in suffering we also have pleasure. The pleasure of crying, of complaining, and to be heard. Pleasure of telling our problems and the things that have happened to us, so that others know that things have gone very wrong for us, and that we have had a very bad time. And if we are sad, we put on sad songs to be sadder, and continue enjoying the pain. In short, we make pain a pleasure. And the problem with all these pleasures and sufferings is that they make us lose enormous amounts of energy. All those defects of partying, laughing, having vices, falling in love, disappointments, depressions, self-pity, feed here. In this circle we find the desire, who works as a psychological trainer, Lucifer, tempting and testing us. If we defeat him, we become masters of fire and light. If we don't defeat him, we become his slaves and we can never stop being what we are. All day long we have thousands of desires. Desire to fight, to criticize, to eat, to smoke a cigarette, to watch pornography, to masturbate, to lie, to cry, etc. And when a desire is felt in the emotional center, it is like a fire. We must understand that desire is the source of all strength. With desire we have two options: refuse the desire or surrender to it. Pleasure is just the bait that defects give us, which always turns out to be only a momentary pleasure, which ends up turning into pain. And we always fall for the same bait because we don't realize that happiness is not in either of these two poles, pleasure and suffering, but it is in the center. In that conscious force that we recover by denying ourselves both. Denying ourselves to surrender our consciousness in exchange for pleasure, and denying ourselves to surrender our consciousness when suffering. The Buddha Gautama said that happiness is found in the absence of desire, and we, humanity, are confused thinking that we will find happiness by fulfilling our desires. But desire is a bottomless pit. It is never filled nor permanently satisfied, and so we die without really finding true satisfaction or happiness. To work this third infradimension, we must learn to refuse each of our egoic desires, to recover the fire or energy to make our creations, and to recover the spirit and strength to do our inner work. That fire or spirit will allow us to meditate, to achieve conscious astral projections, to teach others, to practice supersex, and to see progress in our inner work. Now let us examine the fourth infradimension, which corresponds to the sphere of the sun. This is related to our imbalance, also related to our lower intellectual center. This imbalance is generated in us by our wasteful defects and our hoarding defects. Both lead us to misery since our imbalance always ends up turning us into beggars. Our wasteful defects always want to throw away all the external and internal wealth. Our wealth is our energy, our time, and our money. We must understand the need to eliminate these defects that keep us unbalanced, and that lead us to material and spiritual misery. And we must observe our hoarding defects, which don't invest internal and external wealth. They keep it, they retain it, and prevent us from wisely investing it, doing what needs to be done, until the thief selves steal it. These defects make us beggars since they do not allow the construction of the existential bodies to be done. The fifth infradimension is the sphere of Mars. It is related to our motor center, which manages our deeds and words. Here we find the force, the good or bad use of it, and the defect of anger. Anger manifests through words, actions, and even omissions. It expresses itself in insults, shouting, rudeness, physical aggression, assault, ignoring others, sarcasm, or withholding help out of resentment. Although we possess great strength, it is often misdirected, as much of it is conditioned by anger. This dimension is also where we find our willpower. To take the force out of anger, we must study all the details of the anger that manifest in us in our daily lives. And in order not to feed these defects, we must learn to change our way of reacting. Anger tends to arise instantly. When someone offends or blames us, when we experience fear, frustration, guilt, or doubt, we react mechanically with anger. Thus, we must begin practicing self-observation to identify the specific triggers of our anger and stop it through psychological death. In those moments when anger arises, we must ask our Divine Mother to eliminate both the impulse to react and the internal cause behind it. And we will see that if we don't react, the mind will try to convince us, telling us, "You cannot let that person humiliate you, or ignore you, or disobey you." We also eliminate those defects talking in our mind and don't react. And then, when we manage to control ourselves, we regain our strength. We need to know that an angry person is actually someone very weak, who has no strength of his own or the ability to self-control. When we are angry, we lose control over ourselves. There are specific situations that trigger our anger, and we repeatedly fall into the same pattern, arguing, shouting, attacking, only to later regret it, crying or lamenting the consequences. A person free from anger, however, can handle any situation consciously. We must also pay attention to our impatience, as it is one of the main factors that leads to anger. Impatience accumulates within us until it eventually erupts. By working on this infradimension, we will reclaim our strength and self-control, and we will cultivate true willpower. The sixth infradimension is the sphere of Jupiter, related to our superior emotional center. Jupiter is the generous of the solar system. In opposition to this, in this sphere we find all our tyrannical selves. Tyranny gives but expects something in return, and does not respect the free will of others. What makes tyranny particularly deceptive is that tyrants often mistake their control for love. These selves share a common trait: they believe they possess the absolute truth. Convinced of their own righteousness, they impose their will and beliefs on others, even at the expense of others' freedom. For example, there is tyranny in relationships where we expect our partner to act and think according to our desires. Tyranny in the workplace where we dominate employees. Tyranny over children, forcing them to eat what they dislike, study what we believe is best for them instead of what they truly want, or marry someone we consider suitable rather than allowing them to choose. We are tyrants with everyone. We want people to think as we think, and to like what we like. We are tyrants when we don't want to allow others to act with free will, and we want people to do what we want them to do, believe what we think is true, and so on. Here we find all kinds of dictators. Our inner tyrant is always seeking someone to dominate. The more power it acquires, the more dangerous it becomes. And this defect deceives us. We justify it by believing that we act out of love. But true love is respect, whereas tyranny is arrogance and selfishness. In our blindness, we impose our will and, in doing so, make the lives of those around us miserable. To clean this inner infradimension, we must study and eliminate all our tyrant and dictator selves. Those who do not let others say or act with free will. All those who attempt against love and the divine, blasphemers, skeptics, materialists, atheists, etc. In return, we will receive wisdom, and that true love, which is the ability to give without expecting anything in return. The seventh infradimension is the sphere of Saturn. It is related to the superior intellectual center. Saturn is in charge of managing nature. In this infradimension we find all crimes against the Holy Spirit, against nature, and all violence against art. We find violence against the Holy Spirit, which is our sexual creative energy, and against art, which is the sexual practice, in our fornication defects, masturbators, homosexuals, lesbians, adulterers. Our defects of lasciviousness, pornography, prostitution, those who practice sex with animals, those who practice anal sex, oral sex, the auto-homosexuals, the sexual abusers, those who have sex several times a day, those who copulate when the woman is pregnant or menstruating, those who force themselves to have sex, those who force their partner to have sex when having no desire to do so, the rapists, those who spill energy outside the temple, those who use contraceptives, those who abort, those who castrate themselves, those who force others to castrate themselves, those who castrate animals, those who do grafts. The eyes of witchcraft, the eyes that criticize, the eyes that slander, etc. We must work on all these defects in order to achieve purity in sex and reach the true practices of supersex. There is violence against God in the scoundrels of the intellect that deny man the spiritual possibility. Also, we find here the ones that use violence against themselves, the suicides and the ones who damage or mutilate their bodies, and the one that starve their bodies. We also find here those who are violent against their own property and the property of others. Another essential aspect to observe is our relationship with Mother Nature. Here reside the defects responsible for environmental destruction, pollution of water, air, and soil, as well as harm inflicted upon the elementals. From this work, we will rescue all the gifts and powers of the Holy Spirit. The eighth infradimension is the sphere of Uranus. Uranus is related to the force of the Holy Spirit, the sexual creative energy, our Divine Mother. It represents the word itself, the truth. In this sphere, on the contrary, we find all our defects related to lying and forgery, our counterfeiting and fraudulent defects. Here we find all those who counterfeit religions, counterfeiters of money, imitators, all the incestuous, sowers of discord, the bad advisors, and the black magicians who invite others to fornicate. Those who make promises and break their promises, the scandalous, the schismatic, the false, the hypocrites, etc. And all those who twist the truth. To combat this infradimension, we must live in search of the truth. Every lie we tell creates countless chains and entanglements, as one falsehood requires many others to sustain it. Before we realize it, we become trapped in a web of deception, harming both ourselves and others in the process. We must deeply reflect on the consequences of lying, how it damages those around us, how it corrupts our own being, and how it distances us from our inner Christ, which is the embodiment of truth. The ninth and last infradimension is the sphere of Neptune. We are right now in the sexual apparatus. Here we find all the treacherous selves of our psychology, each one of our desires, each one of our justifications and washing of hands, and each one of our ill wills, that prefer to do the will of the ego than that of the consciousness. This is where we find the most terrible flaw of all, our treacherous self. This is the force that, across countless existences, has kept us from accomplishing the work we came here to do, the work of self-realization. It is this self that continuously betrays our inner being, our own consciousness. Each time we experience an egoic desire and justify acting upon it, we commit an act of ill will. We sell our consciousness to satisfy our ego. For esoteric work, we must discover each one of our traitor selves, which manifest throughout the day. And those are the 9 infradimensions. And it is precisely the work we do to discover and eliminate all these defects from within, which is known as self-knowledge. Because by eliminating all the errors within us, by eliminating all our darkness, we will get to know and develop what we really are. From these infradimensions will come the light that illuminates our interior darkness, or the wisdom of evil, and the love that is trapped in those defects. And we will achieve this with the constant practice of psychological death. And well, this has been today's conference. I hope you find it very useful in your self-discovery process. I invite you to our next lecture, where we will explore the 7 bodies of the being, their characteristics, and the process of creating them. Don't miss it. See you at the next lecture.